Good afternoon. It's just past noon. Uh, Welcome to everybody who has joined us. We have a large number of people joining us today. We have over 100 people who've joined, and we're also going live on YouTube. This is a part of course, the 150th anniversary of Gandhi Jayanti, and IIT Bombay is doing a series of events. Actually, 11 to 12 was a talk by one of our colleagues who works on solar energy. 11 to 12, he may have just finished. A number of talks have been planned over the next few days, and this is a small effort on part of CTARA to have a discussion on Gandhi in a very important moment in many kinds of ways. CTARA itself, for some of you who are perhaps new to this session today, because we're also trying and inviting everybody to join up, is uh, a small center in IIT Bombay that works at the intersection of technology and development. And through our founding head, Professor Date, goes back in some ways or in very explicit ways to Schumacher, and I think through Schumacher to Gandhi and Kumarappa, among other things. So I think there is a direct relevance to what CTARA does or seeks to do in the context of Gandhian ideas and thoughts. Whether we are able to do it, how we are able to do it, I think are questions that are always open, are always going to be challenging, and we have to figure that out. But we have to start somewhere, and this is the discussion today. I'm extremely grateful to the three panelists who have agreed to join us. It has been a bit of a squeeze because we started off late. All of them are committed to doing a number of other things, but we did a little bit of juggling and we managed to get the slot. So Rajni Bakshi, Shambhu Prasad, and Chaitra Redkar, thank you so much for having agreed to join this. This is a session living with Gandhi in the 21st century. So the idea I thought would be to learn from you, hear from the three of you of your own personal experiences, where it began, how it began, and how you're engaging with Gandhi. Of course, in action, could be thought, could be many other things. Rather than approach the whole issue from the larger political or the ideological or the philosophical perspective, which of course are not separate from each other. So I am going to read out short bio notes that I have circulated, but I think it will be important to discuss them and also emphasize a couple of things that I would like to emphasize, and then we can go on and move on. So let me first start by introducing Rajni Bakshi. So I might also mention at a personal note, I have known Rajni and Shambhu for a very long time. Chaitra is a new introduction, thanks to our colleague Subodh, who suggested a name, and looking forward to interacting. So Rajni Bakshi is a Mumbai-based author, speaker, and curator of Ahimsa Conversations. And she specifically mentioned this to me, that this must be mentioned. And I must say that I also looked up this a couple of days ago. This is a series of conversations that Rajni has been doing from the beginning of this year, which is 30th of January, 2020, for exploring the possibilities of non-violence in today's times. And in the communication that has gone out to all of you, the YouTube channel link is there. It can easily be found on YouTube, and it is an absolutely fascinating set of discussions that are going on there. I spent some time yesterday looking at them, and equally the content, as particularly in today's times where the media is going berserk, the nature of the conversations, the slow, thoughtful questions and answers, the meditative nature, almost ruminating that Rajni and the person being spoken to was very, very comforting, very thoughtful, and very, very insightful. So thank you, Rajni. And I would really request all of you to please go there and have a look. The entire conversations are there, but they're also very nicely edited 5 and 6 minute versions of each of them. In addition to this, she is a prolific writer. Her books include Bazaars, Conversations, and Freedom for a Market Culture Beyond Greed and Fear, which was published in India by Penguin in 2009, and Greenleaf UK in the UK in 2012. The book also won 2 Vodafone Crossword Awards. Her earlier book, which is one of my favorites, I read it many years ago, Bapu Kuti, Journeys in Rediscovery of Gandhi, was published by Penguin India in 1998. I read this book many years ago, and I read this book many years after I knew it was published. I found it very, very beautiful, very moving. And I had written to Rajni, I don't know if she remembers, I wrote to her saying, I read Bapu Kuti and I was deeply inspired and moved. And I'm very regretful that I did not read the book till now. And Rajni said something very interesting. She said, Pankaj, don't worry, books find readers. It's not that the readers find books. So I just thought that was very beautiful. And this book is also one of the inspirations behind the Hindi film Swadesh. She's also the author of Long Haul, the Bombay Textile Workers Strike of 1980 to 1983, published by Build in 1986. She's a member of the executive committee of the Gandhi Smriti and Darshan Smriti, an autonomous body under the Ministry of Culture, Government of India. Of course, this is only a brief bio and there's a lot more to be said, but it gives us an idea. Let me go to Chaitra Redkar. She is currently an associate professor in humanities and social science at the Indian Institute of Science Education and Research in Pune. Or maybe 20 years before this, she was teaching in SNDT Women's University in Pune. She specializes in modern Indian political thought and social movements with more than 2 decades of research and training and experience in these areas. She has been closely associated with the Gandhian movement in Maharashtra. She has written broadly in the area of political ideas and Indian politics, and has authored a number of books. 2 that I came across were one in Marathi, which was published this year, if I'm not mistaken, Sane Guruji, Vyakti Ani Vichar. And I think me having studied in Pune in my school days, I do remember lessons in the Marathi textbooks on Sane Guruji, but beyond that, we were never acquainted with what he said and did. So we'd love to hear from Chaitra about Sane Guruji. And her other book, which is another book also on Kumarappa, Gandhi's very close colleague, Gandhian Engagement with Capital, Perspectives of J.C. Kumarappa, that was published by Sage in 2019. And just since we are in the age of webinars and some very fascinating ones, she is actually coordinating and organizing a special webinar series at ICER on Indian democracy, which starts today evening. So please do check it out. And also thanks to her that in this whole other commitment that she has come aboard and joined us. And lastly, Shambhu. Shambhu is a professor in strategic management and social sciences at the Institute of Rural Management, Anand. His doctoral thesis, which now at least 2 of my students have read for their master's work, was on exploring Gandhian science, a case study of the Khadi movement. And his research since then draws from a science and technology studies perspective applied to themes on rural innovation, sustainable agriculture, social entrepreneurship, and collective enterprises. He's a founding member of Knowledge in Civil Society Network that was involved in bringing out a very interesting document called Knowledge Swaraj, a citizen's manifesto on science and technology policy in India that was inspired by Gandhi's Hind Swaraj. And he also shared with me, I might just add, a 2007 article he wrote about his own journey into with Gandhi. And I think it's available and it's worth reading. And what was extremely nice about that article in many ways is that he refers to the very famous Sanjay Dutt film, Lage Raho Munna Bhai. And he talks about how that connects with Gandhi and seeks to connect people with Gandhi in many ways. And also just to mention that the book Bapu Kuti that Rajni wrote and I mentioned also features some of the work in which say Shambhu was involved. So let me, with this brief kind of introduction, let me go to Shambhu first. And Shambhu, on a very, very personal note, if I might say, ever since I have known you and seen you, I have only seen you wearing kurtas and pajamas, perhaps only khadi, but certainly handloom and khadi. And why I raise this, I think it is not a trivial decision you made at some point in your life. And I think it's very central. And when I read some of the things that you have written, it comes across as something that's very important. It is personal, but I think it's more than that. So can you tell us a little bit about why do you wear what you just wear and what it signifies and what it means to you? And where does it begin?
Oh, you take me some time back, but essentially, I think the commitment to, wearing handloom largely arose of...
But I think it's...
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yes.
So I'm saying that the commitment to, work on handlooms and, wearing handloom, khadi is more difficult to get sometimes, got, in some sense strengthened when I joined an organization working with craftspeople. And it is through that process that one was able to understand the dimensions of, what khadi signifies at some level. And of course, it's a comfortable cloth to wear. A khadi mask in today's context seems much, much more exciting. I just picked one recently in Ahmedabad. Otherwise we feel suffocated if you're having a other kind of mask and so on. So a sheer comfort level, you know, to drop the jeans and get into a pajama is itself a great relief, so to speak. And of course, once you get into middle age, the pajama expands according to the size of your girth. So there's nothing wrong with, having that. And I think but importantly, it does help with the connect that you are able to have with many people. And at least some time back, maybe 20, 30 years back, if you were in the, uh, you know, the so-called third sector, it was almost natural for all of us to kind of wear these. So I don't think it was a very, it was not a very difficult choice given the context I was in. But I had a little bit of introduction to Khadi even before I joined Dastkar Andhra, because of the availability of the shop in Chennai where I studied and grew up. So broadly speaking, I think uh, it's a personal choice, and to a large extent, I have continued to manage to, you know, wear these along, and also, in a sense, look around in case I have to move from a kurta to a shirt for a similar kind of alternative. And I think, sometimes saying I want to do this will actually push us to do other kinds of things, to connect with people. Because in today's world, everything is available online. We probably don't even go to a shop to buy clothes and other kinds of things. But I think the cloth is a good way to connect people. There are various ways you can look at these connections, but broadly speaking, at a personal level, it's a useful thing to have when we, especially if you're working with handloom weavers and others. So that was the context in which I ended up wearing these. Yeah.
Is it also a kind of personal commitment and a personal statement? May be a strong word, but to wear what you're wearing because it also says more than just an experience of your own kind.
Yes, I mean, I don't want to carry it too heavily because,
Sure.
it kind of can create other ripples. But, if one is dealing with rural India, and our institute is supposed to be dealing with rural India, I think the commitment to wear products of rural India is important. Irma's own convocation is special because of the fact that, we are supposed to get our degrees. We did this much earlier. IIT Bombay has possibly followed recently by having these, kurta as the instead of the gowns, which would seem such a bad idea to be receiving your degree in gowns in Indian weather. So I think there's been a, it's a easy way to connect with people around. And to sit on the floor if you're going out on a field visit and all of this, you know, it probably helps in connection, but sometimes it doesn't. I mean, so if I'm teaching a course on strategic management today in class, I have to think twice before, because if they say I'm wearing khadi kurta and I talk about a company, they feel, the galat jaga aage kind of things.
And just keeping on with that, can you also tell us a little bit of your earlier experiences and your journey, if I might say, into Gandhi? You've done this, I think, very interesting thesis that you did at IIT Delhi, but that came much later. But what were perhaps your earlier influences? In the paper that you sent me, you do write about my experiments with truth, Gandhi's autobiography. But can you briefly tell us a little bit more about how this started for you? How did you get interested? What were your early and important influences?
I would think actually the one of the early influences was my experiments with truth, which I probably read during my first year or second year of engineering. And I still remember the first thing I ended up doing was possibly trying to experiment with fasting at least once a week. I ended up choosing the day when the hostel food was particularly bad. So, it starts in some sense in that way. Uh, and we had this course on technology and development. And, that's when it was a course that was to encourage us to read non-fiction as well seriously. And one of my friends picked up Hind Swaraj during that time, and it kind of completely changed his worldview. He was very interested in developing technological solutions to solve the child labor problem in Sivakasi. And, he read this book and he felt it, the sheer courage with which it was written. And he wanted to be a journalist and all of that. So we were a small group of people who started discussing these. I had an opportunity to read Ashish Nandi's Intimate Enemy. And through that, I ended up reading other works of Ashish Nandi as well. And I think this idea of Nandi's, this thing between tradition and modernity, and Gandhi in some sense situated in that, the confidence with which Gandhi possibly dealt with the West, all these elements, and the concept of doing it in a non-violent manner, because of course you could always be a leftist, or in today's terminology, an urban Naxal and all those kinds of things. But I think it 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 gave an opportunity to engage. And I think one of the other aspects was that for some of us, our generation, slowly started looking at Gandhi somewhat differently. I think a previous generation, maybe Rajni, yours is not quite fully the previous generation. They couldn't refer to Gandhi without saying Gandhi ji. And the generation afterwards, I think that we have, Gandhi started becoming a bit more personal, because the memory of it has gone. Of course, we did have Ben Kingsley's version of Gandhi as well, and Richard Attenborough's version of Gandhi. But this ability of mixing the personal and political, gives you an opportunity to explore, even if you agree with some parts and don't agree with other parts.
Great, thank you. Chaitra, can I request you to kind of take off from there and tell us a little bit about your own engagement? And I think you mentioned a lot in the Maharashtra context in particular. So if you can tell us a little bit about how you got interested, what have been your main engagements and inspirations?
Yeah. I basically sort of grew up in a typical kind of Maharashtra's approach to Gandhi, where you are sort of taught in your schools and in your by your peers that how Savarkar was better than Gandhi, and how Subhash Chandra Bose could have been a better replacement to Nehru, and what kind of politics which Gandhi did to Subhash Chandra Bose. So I actually grew up in that surroundings. And what I basically found completely opposite to what I was trained to believe in was rather a very unfortunate, a very something which rather didn't have any academic kind of reference as such, but it was assassination of Rajiv Gandhi. And that sort of uh, created some kind of feelings and some kind of requirement at personal level to think about the entire violence non-violence kind of uh, dilemmas which we were put into throughout this schooling and throughout this training. But a more serious understanding and more serious study of Gandhi started when I joined my MA program, and my teacher, Professor Sumant, whose work I'm actually now editing one volume on Gandhi. We have already published posthumously, and the other work I'm editing right now. So through him sort of began the engagement. And the first sort of academic assignment that was given to me was for a student seminar on and where I read a paper on Gandhi's interpretation of Gita, where I compared Gandhi and Tilak's approach to how they interpret Gita. So from there, actually, the journey sort of started, and I went on exploring so many aspects of Gandhi, which I realized were completely wrong way we were told, we were sort of introduced to these aspects. And that sort of created a very fascinating journey with Gandhi. And later it so happened that the same kind of experiences I had, particularly with Sane Guruji and Kumarappa, because my engagement with Sane Guruji was on a different plane. In Maharashtra, generally every child reads Shyamchi Ai, and that's something which in childhood you get to read this. So my image of Sane Guruji was that of a children's writer who sort of makes you cry with his stories. And so later part of my childhood, I'd rather kept Sane Guruji away. But then I came, I came across one of his books, and that was the biography of Prophet Paigambar. And I was sort of, it came as a surprise because I found so many similarities in his approach, and something which was written by Montgomery Watt. And I was then that I started reading more on Sane Guruji. And then I got some of his fictional writing, which was very less popular. For instance, Sandhya is one of the novels where he basically presents his dilemma of choosing between Marx and Gandhi. So how somebody who's seen by Maharashtra as a very emotional and very meek kind of a person, but he asks some very interesting questions to Gandhi and to the communist movement, which was active, the way it was unfolding in mid 1930s and early 1940s. So that sort of created interest in him. In case of Kumarappa also, and that is one of my, which certainly has background of the way I was introduced to Gandhi and the kind of image that I had in my mind about Sane Guruji. But that sort of has created a curiosity of of knowing the people who sort of stayed away from limelight, or they got marginalized. So the question was like, why Kumarappa got marginalized and why he suddenly becomes known towards his birth anniversary. What happened to him, or what happened to him particularly after 1948 to 1960, when he was very much there, and why Gandhians didn't consider him very seriously. So these questions sort of kept troubling me, and that sort of started my inquiry in Gandhism and my association with this entire discourse.
So also Chaitra, just before we had the session I was having a conversation with one of our students, when the idea of Gandhi becoming the Mahatma, on the one hand it is very inspirational, but I think in a way Shambhu alluded to that, but in a different way. Does it also make him distant? Does it make him intimidating? Does he become less accessible because he's up there and far away? So that is one thing I would like you to tell us what you think. And second is also with all this engagement with the literature and stuff like that, what you mentioned the impact of Rajiv Gandhi's assassination and your need to question. But at a more personal level, has it been able to, if I might push you, to either Gandhian thought or Gandhian action? Does it reflect in your own life? Do you see it as a person in today's times? Are you able to do things that you might consider on those lines? Or because we are all in some senses who are interested also grappling with those questions of relevance of our own. So if you have some insight, some experiences from your own life.
Yeah. Uh, uh, the first part is whether he being Mahatma keeps him away from us. So this also, I found it who basically, even within the Gandhian circles, is presenting him as Mahatma. and who is approaching him more as a human being and more on equal level, and what is their need of presenting him as Mahatma. And that sort of creates some kind of mysticism, some kind of such glamour around him, which makes it difficult for others to approach him on a very on a more plain level. But then what I felt is, if you actually go on reading his letters, or go on reading um, maybe his interaction with his colleagues, um, and that rather helps us to understand him as a human being, keeping aside the kind of glamour and the entire image of the Mahatma, and which he's surrounded with. And what I, at personal level, what I've felt is reading that his letters with the ashram sisters, or his letters with his colleagues, that is something which is so insightful to understand him, and to find answers to many of your personal questions also. Even academically, of course, that has helped me, but on personal note, I found it's very interesting. For instance, there is this one episode, and since we are talking about our personal growing up or personal journey with him, I stayed in Mumbai all by myself for 21 years, and I was not prepared to stay there, because I just wanted to try for some time. Maybe I'll stay there, and I absolutely never been to Mumbai. And so there was some kind of a fear of staying alone, and which I had to deal with. And then I come across this letter which a young girl had written to Gandhi. And she writes to him that in the evening she had some work, and late in the evening, and she had to go out for doing that work. And there she realized that a boy was following her on a bicycle. And she reached there, wherever, whatever that work she had to do, she completed that. And on a return journey, she again realized that the same boy is following her. So she stopped for a moment, she pushed him, and then returned home. And she writes to Gandhi that I could protect myself, but I could protect myself by using some amount of violence. I had to push him. So is it possible to deal with such situation by being completely non-violent? And there Gandhi writes to her that for me, becoming fearlessness is important, and this fearlessness will lead you to a more non-violent approach, and you will discover in your own way how such situations could be handled in a non-violent way. But what is important for me is that you didn't fear to register your uncomfort and your protest of the way he was treating you. So for me, that is very important, and that is something which I realized is the core of Gandhi's approach to non-violence. Because in concrete situations, uh, the non-violent ways to handle the situations would differ from situation to situation. But what is more significant is to have this nirbhayata in you. And that at personal level, I felt that such values basically are very crucial in approaching Gandhi, and also in your own journey.
Right. Thank you, Chaitra. We're losing you in the middle a little bit, as I think probably if you can just check your network. I don't know if it's a problem at my end, but not a big problem, but we just intermittently, but we got what you're saying. Thank you so much. Let me take this opportunity now to go to Rajni. And Rajni, also again, the same kind of question I'd like to ask you as to your, like Shambhu mentioned, you're a much older generation. So your engagement, your influences, and also if you'd like to reflect a little bit on what both Shambhu and Chaitra have said. But first, how did you get where you are in that sense, and where did it begin?
Well, firstly, I grew up at a time, in the 70s when revolution had not lost its luster. And I was growing up largely abroad because my father was, he was a Reserve Bank of India officer, but he had been sent on deputation by the FAO to West Indies. And then we were in the US for a spell. So there was very much a sense, I don't know where it came from really, that, of being restless to go back to India and, bring about some big change. And Gandhiji was very much part of the atmosphere in which we were growing up, because I have vivid memories of my father telling me how he cycled. My father was growing up in Lahore. Both sides of my family come from pre-partition Punjab. That he heard that Gandhiji's train was going to pass Lahore at some unearthly hour of 2 a.m. or something. But still he went just to stand outside the coach, and he would, tell me how he saw Gandhiji's feet because he was sleeping with his feet to the window. Or my mother, saying that she was growing up in Peshawar, where women were almost not, well, at least upper class women were not allowed to go out on their own ever, and hardly ever even in company. But that the one outing that she recalls with her sisters and her mother is to go listen to Gandhiji give a public talk. So that was very much in the background. But as an adult, I must say, for me, there are two major moments. One is reading Louis Fisher. I'm sorry, but for me, that is the big entry point. I know it's no longer considered but for me, it still is the definitive story.
Can you tell us a little more about this, because most of us may not even have heard?
Oh, sorry. So in a sense, I think it was the first major biography of Gandhi because it's published in the early 50s. Louis Fisher was an American journalist, and he had visited India several times during the freedom struggle. And in fact, I would say to all of you that if you don't read the whole book, just read a chapter called My Week with Gandhi, because it has this quality of, how Gandhi affected Fisher. So that is the book I'm referring to. And the other was an article by Claude Alvarez on Sevagram Ashram and the Gandhi hut at Sevagram Ashram. Till then, I had no idea. This must be, I don't know, 82 or 83. And suddenly I felt that whatever else I did in life, I must immediately somehow go to this place called Sevagram and see this hut for myself. So this would be maybe in 85 or 86, maybe a little later, not 82. And, that's where I first got hold of Hind Swaraj, the book that has already been referred to. And I too read it on a train journey. Many people have read it on a train since subsequently many friends have said that they read it for the first time on a train. So this is where it began. But I think the more what is pertinent for our life today is that I also had the great good luck and good fortune to get drawn into a variety of activities. One of them was Lokayan. It was called a Dialogue of the People. This was initially a kind of a project, but then it became a process, kind of a network activity. It was anchored at the Center for Study of Developing Societies. So Ashish Nandi had a very big hand in it, as did Rajni Kothari and D.L. Sheth and Giri Deshinkar. So I had the great privilege, really, of, in a sense, intellectually and politically growing up, in the shadow of all these people who were giants in their own way. And so I was introduced to the Gandhian ethos in a very live and applied manner. And it is because of those engagements that then I got to know a whole range of activists who were doing a wide variety of things across India. And Bapu Kuti got written not because I wanted to write a book, but because I had this amazing sense of being so privileged to know these people, that it suddenly one day struck me that I must share this with a wider, with the world in a sense, because many people, most overwhelming number of people will never have a chance to actually meet these people doing amazing work. And my main motivation was that I was shocked by the level of cynicism in the Indian middle class about our present, our future as a country, as a civilization. And so I thought that sharing these stories of contemporary creativity would perhaps be a counter to that.
Great, thank you. And I must say, Rajni, just last year, exactly a year ago, a batch of our students in the first year then, in the course that we do, we all made a trip to Sevagram. And about a class of 40, we stayed in Sevagram for 2 days and we went to Magan Sangrahalaya, we went to, and I think I can say for the entire class, it was my first visit. And I can quite understand when you say what that impact is. And we all came back, I think, and I can say for the entire class, we all came back quite moved. We had a very interesting session at Nai Talim with the principal there. We went to Magan Sangrahalaya. We had a great lunch there. That's besides the point. But we were all very deeply moved by what we saw, by the ambience of the place, by what people were doing. And I was just wondering, is Bapu Kuti 2 in the works? Because that's more
Well,
than maybe 25 years ago, and so much has happened. And I think there's so much, probably would be, we need that dose of inspiration and hope.
I'm hoping that the Ahimsa conversations are a 21st version, 21st century version. Because in a sense, that's what this series on YouTube is hoping to do, is to just quietly present in a global public platform wide range of voices that are sometimes just pondering. So that's why I felt that it was important not to limit it to to people who have done dramatic and very path-breaking kind of society-changing movements, etc. Many of those people will hopefully appear as we go along, who have actually themselves led movements. But actually today it's not enough to look at the issue of non-violence merely in terms of political protest. Because how violence and non-violence feature in our everyday life, in our technology, in our economic systems, in how we deal with the rest of nature, all of that I felt was what really needed to be shared on a public platform like this. So I hope, and of course at some point some summary form of these conversations will appear as a book. I hope that will happen. That's very much part of the plan.
Great, thank you. Shambhu, would you just like to respond now in a sense, an open sense, to any points you want to add, or responding to what Rajni or Chaitra said? There is this comment that Shambhu has put in the chat where he says, I recall a few who mentioned that Bapu Kuti was so refreshing and got them out of cynicism. So I think that does say a lot. But yeah, Shambhu, anything else you'd like to add or ask or share with us? We can't hear you, Shambhu. I think you are probably muted.
Yeah.
We still can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I just unmuted myself. So
yes.
I think what I find enduring in some sense, this has happened to me a few times. I've been surprised. I mean, I've not done much work on my own PhD thesis after my PhD thesis, and I felt I have forgotten Gandhi, so to speak. But somehow or the other, it keeps getting back to me in some way. And as one is getting older or in a different frame and so on, I'm just amazed at the possibility of going back and trying to find newer meanings in this situation. I mean, just recently, just to narrate an incident, I watched this film social dilemma, which most people also have seen. And I think there is this, and I think it's an important film that many of the engineers of IIT Bombay should be watching. You know, and this engagement with this question of the fact that we don't know what is truth, which is being said, and you know, Twitter says we spread false, and hate spreads 6 times faster than truth. And today, not to have someone who we feel is speaking the truth is actually can be quite debilitating. And I think who's seen to be speaking the truth. I mean, it's not my version of the truth versus your version of the truth, and so on. So I think one of the fascinating possibilities is the opportunity for us to revisit Gandhi from completely different perspectives on where we stand today. And maybe that's the role of many classic texts as well. When we were engaging with Gandhi 10 years back, roughly, when all of us said, let's try and read Hind Swaraj, but look at it from can citizens write their own science and technology policy? And finally, we came out with the document, and what I feel was interesting is that throughout the document, we don't mention Gandhi, we don't quote Gandhi anywhere, but it can be a Gandhi-inspired conversation and meaning. We can have differences. We had a lot of differences when this document was being written as well. But that, I think, to me is a fascinating part. And in India today, we do not have many leaders whom you can talk against and not get beaten up. I think some people have written about it. It's very difficult. Our icons have become so larger than life that you cannot say anything against them. That kind of takes away the human element of our existence. But Gandhi has that potential. That's why the younger generation have even a greater potential, because they don't carry a certain kind of baggage of Gandhiji, the Mahatma, the father of the nation, and so on. But the writings again is so accessible, and it's become more and more accessible in the 21st century because of the internet and the collected works being available online. And he was perhaps the most documented person in history. Before, of course, we have better ways of doing documentation. So I think there is something about it that we need to draw upon. And we have this information. It's just a fact that we don't seem to be using it enough in our in our curriculum, in our policies, and so on.
Yeah, Chaitra, any thoughts on your part? Of course, the larger issues, but anything more reflective from your side as well?
One thing which rather I'm in the context in which Shambhu spoke. Generally, of course, what we call is the entire onslaught of post-truth context on us, and the entire issue of how to rather talk about truth and what is truth in itself is a big question in today's times. So I do feel that with Gandhi, I felt that we do get um, some understanding of how we landed up into this situation. That is one thing which I felt. And it's not that we have reached here all of a sudden. What we have been doing in form of social activism, or the way social movements got shaped and their agenda got shaped, in itself, what we were doing was rather asserting for our truth as universal truth, rather than acknowledging the fact that we are talking only about part of truth. Our truth is a relative truth. So while being confident about our own realizations, that openness to acknowledge the truth which even our opponents have realized, to acknowledge and to have some kind of a dialogue, I felt that the progressive social movements or the progressive practices didn't do that. And the culmination is somewhere that we have landed up in a situation where there is complete lie. It's no longer even like relative truth kind of, and that possibility of dialogue is also sort of disappeared. So that is one insight or one understanding which I got while uh, by reading Gandhi or engaging with him. But what I personally is dealing with, or sort of still a question before me, is all this certainly helps us to resolve many of the issues and many of the complicated questions at personal level, and probably still in our own zones and in the small sort of empires that we have built, we are still able to take up many issues. It could be organic farming, it could be issues related to technology, it could be issues related to couple of like maybe village development, and many such issues. But the way Gandhi was able to connect all these and engage with a broader context simultaneously, that is something probably we are not finding space for. So we still are able to do our own bit, and that also but I think tells us how Gandhian movement sort of ended up in the post Gandhian era. So somebody taking up one aspect of what Gandhi was doing and going ahead with that, and many experiments were still done, but then there are some bigger questions, some larger questions, even the entire requirement of engaging with the state, and what kind of relationship we need to have with that kind of politics, with the way state has evolved over the period. And what is it that basically we should do with state, or just continue what we are doing and ignoring that aspect altogether? So these are some of the questions which I'm still exploring. I really don't know what is the way out in such a situation.
Right, great. Thank you so much. We are at 12:50 already, and I think it's just getting so interesting. We'll have to wrap up in about 10-15 minutes. So maybe this might just be the right time to ask if any of the people who've joined us, we have quite a few people. We have about 100 people on Zoom and 50 on YouTube, if I'm right. So please feel free to type in questions. You can also type it on the YouTube channel, and one of our students will put it up in Zoom, and I can ask. It can come for the entire group, or I've actually asked that it be sent only privately to me, so I have control on what questions to ask. But that is just a matter of how it comes. While we are waiting for the questions to come, and I hope they will, I was I just thought I will what you mentioned, Rajni, about your family coming from Punjab, from the other side of Punjab. And I think that remains, I think most of us can't understand, we don't have, and certainly the new generation, we don't have the capacity to understand what happened and what the experience was. But I think anybody, and all of us do have friends who are related in some way, have some kind of that experience of what happened in partition and at the time of independence. And those scars continue and perhaps get renewed as we go forward. And perhaps in that sense, then Gandhi becomes, or does he become very personal? Does he become even more relevant at a very, very personal and perhaps a level that many families don't want to even talk about, both at that generation, but carrying on into the. So if you could, maybe it's a difficult question, maybe you have already spoken about it, but please do share a little bit.
Not a difficult question. I think it's a very vital question. I think I get what you're asking. So, in fact, I think Gandhiji is very central, and not just Gandhiji as an individual, but the larger atmosphere through which our country got independence. And I'm not for a moment saying that, there wasn't a pro-violence dimension of the freedom struggle, all that being so, but the dominant atmosphere was such that I grew up in a family where the entire clan was displaced, right? Our entire, we are a jati called Mohyal Brahmins. So our entire larger extended clan had to shift to what is now India. But we were brought up in an atmosphere where we were actively, in a sense, almost told, but more so by the behavior of our elders, that it was just a terrible tragedy, but not something that justified us to be resentful. And that you have to look forward, and it was a massive human tragedy on all sides. And right up till my father lived to be about 80, he died in 2004. Till then, he was bewildered that how it could happen, because they had grown up in an atmosphere of such comfort and, what shall I say, brotherhood between Hindus and Muslims. So, but the important thing for us today is that this has changed. So I now have members among of my family, elders, whose memories have suddenly changed. I mean, as you can imagine, because I grew up to be a reporter, I do have a rather vivid memory of who said what through, the 60 odd years of my life. So I know that I'm not getting it wrong, but there are people who are changing how they remember the situation. And so this brings home to me what Vinobaji used to say. Vinobaji used to say that the human being, there's a spectrum in which human beings appear. At one end of the spectrum are the Hitlers and the Pol Pots and, generally the people who can't help but be cruel and mean and destructive. And at the other far end of the spectrum are Buddha and Gandhi and Jesus and, well, Vinoba himself, I suppose. The bulk of humanity tends to be in between, and it gets swayed one way or the other in this spectrum, depending on the atmosphere that has been generated. Therefore, I don't blame my uncle for how he's feeling today. But I realize that the atmosphere at that time supported, okay, forgive and forget kind of feeling, and also a very palpable awareness that both sides had suffered horrifically. It was not a one-sided thing. So who is to blame whom? And of course, today for me, if you ask me the why Gandhiji is relevant to this whole question of partition is not only on the Hindu-Muslim issue, but primarily on the absurdity of national boundaries. And gosh, now we know this, that in this century, 21st century, if our species has any hope for survival, we will have to look at life through bioregions. We will have to look at what sustains actual life. And if we are going to divide the reality of after all, development and progress is set to one, is put to one side. You cannot exist without food and water and non-toxic air. Even if it is not clean and fresh air, at least it needs to be non-toxic air. So we have to, today, the importance is not to look at, specific solutions that Gandhiji may have been working with in the 30s. Many of them are very important if you are trying to figure out how to make a sustainable livelihood in a local region or a local, area. But it's the large sweeping, his vision of the species, for the species, that is vital.
We have a whole set of questions, and I don't think we're going to have some very interesting questions, observations, and we'll try and save the chat and share it with anybody who's interested, including the panelists. I'll just take up one question, which is kind of talks to the point that Rajiv just made, and any one of you can take it up. Is that Teresa, one of our students, asks about the social, the film that Shambhu mentioned, and she's asking about the internet, and I think it's a question about internet was not there when Gandhi was there. So what does it mean? I mean, there are various ways one can look at that question and answer that question. But I've actually also lost Teresa specific words, but it's a question about what is the relevance. Yeah, here it is. The new scale as the social dilemma is spreading because of the internet. Gandhi lived at a time when the internet was not even discovered. Should we be really looking up to Gandhi for these issues? If yes, what should we strive towards? I think partly, I think Rajni has answered this, but there might be a little more creative and subversive answers to the question of, say, what might Gandhi have done with the internet if it was there? But so maybe either Chaitra or Shambhu can take a shot at that one, and then we'll take a couple of questions more, and then we'll have to wrap up, I think, because Rajni does have to leave.
No, I'm okay. I can be here.
Okay.
I'm here till 1:15.
You are here till 1:15. Okay. Yeah. Would Shambhu or Chaitra want to?
So, just partly to, the previous question as well. And one of the more interesting things about the issue of partition and Gandhi, because you mentioned Fisher's book on My Week with Gandhi. And I think we need to look at Nirmal Kumar Bose's My Days with Gandhi, when he actually was there with Gandhi during this very difficult period in Nawakhali and those places. And I think with all the kinds of doubts and, being an academic, Nirmal Kumar Bose was able to even question Gandhi on certain decisions he was taking during this time. So we do have a very good document along with Louis Fisher's book, which sometimes hasn't been celebrated enough. But I think it brings out, and there's this statement of Mountbatten who says, we are the whole army to try and prevent what was happening on the western side of the border. But there was here this one person who was able to try and quell the riots. And I think it's a very powerful statement. And I think that is an indication of the power of the human potential of nonviolence as well at some level. So that was one point on partition, which I just thought I should add. Well, with regard to the internet, I think this is again a very, a changing situation. Just a few years back, maybe 10 years back, one of your own alumnus, Sudhindra Kulkarni, wrote this book on Gandhi and the Charka. I don't remember the exact name. So he was very positive about the potential of Gandhi, the Charka, and the internet combining together. I would think that today, what's happened since 2011 is a very, very different kind of phenomenon. I don't think we have a full comprehension of what has happened with regard to social media and how it is shaping our minds much more than we are able to try and work out. So, it is of course influencing elections and various other kinds of things. And just the sheer amount of hate messages that's floating around, I don't think we've been living in an era where we are exposed to hate of the mind as much as we have been in recent times. So I think that's the challenge of the internet, which we still haven't quite figured out. That's why the truth challenge is also there. But there are possibly positive sides of it in terms of, I think the question of dissent is an important element. There are people who have, and that's what's interesting about this documentary, they've been part at the helm of what's happening in the, in these Googles and Facebooks and Twitters and so on. And they've raised questions. And I think these questions need to be raised by more people, especially from within the technological community. And, there should be an engagement with people outside as well. Well, it's a strange situation that we may have to use the internet to try and work this out. The power of communication there, there's this story about how, sometimes a message can get communicated even without being actually told. There are evidence of the fact that the loudspeakers were for the first time used during Gandhi's, rallies. India had not seen loudspeakers before that. And many people apparently they couldn't hear Gandhi's speech. And Gandhi was the little voice that you hear of him. He is no way a great communicator verbally. In comparison to our prime minister today, he would stand, as a pale shadow. But I think that the fact that the message can still get communicated is indeed a powerful way of looking at human possibilities beyond just the voice. That's something we still need to explore.
There's a question. There are lots and lots of questions, and I'm going to have to apologize straight away to all the people who've asked, because it's not going to be possible to ask all these or get answers. But hopefully, this is the start of some kind of a conversation, and I will share these with the panelists certainly, because I think to ask them to be sent privately may not have been a good idea, because nobody can see them now. But we do have one of our faculty members, our former head Satish Agnihotri, who's raised his hand. And I'm presuming that raise of hand is because he wants to ask a question. And after questions from the students, Satish, can you please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your or comment to the panelists, please?
Yeah, it related to that issue of internet. And I feel particularly in the Center for Policy Studies, where they are looking at these parallels between the cyberspace and the physical space. I think the issue of morality, issue of equity, and issue of non-violence in communication in cyberspace, each of these, Gandhi is relevant. So I think probably some of our students can start just having a non-violence ranking of messages. And probably if we start rating them, then it will emerge, and probably someone will realize that you can't threaten a woman with a gang rape and write Bharat Mata ki Jai below that. So what is happening is we have to realize that many of the transactions which were happening in the physical space have moved to cyberspace. But the issue of morality, equity, and non-violence will remain. And I think Gandhi will be a pretty powerful guide there. Is your message non-violent? Is your message on the side of morality, immorality, or amorality? And is your message pro-equity or anti-equity? So just a quick comment.
Yeah, thank you. I think the two questions that many of them stand out, but Shreyas one says, I think that's a deeply philosophical question also, saying that everybody has a version of truth. I think which I think most of our panelists have said. Does it end up falsifying one of them or the other? So it's a question of multiple truths. Yes, Chaitra, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's something which
we are losing you, Chaitra. Your signal is.
Sometimes cutting the video improves the sound quality.
That's true.
Okay,
I'll stop your video, Chaitra. Yeah, that'll help.
Yes.
We have seen you. We know.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes, Chaitra, please go ahead.
Okay. So I think this famously quoted elephant and four blind men, probably that would help us understand Gandhi's approach to truth, and this, if everybody has the truth, then where the truth lies. And I think the entire issue is that of our openness to move from our own relative truth to a wider what Gandhi would rather call as absolute truth. The very fact that we are located in different social contexts, we are looking at world from different perspectives, and our own version is true to our own disposition and our own understanding. But then there out in the world, there are people who are located differently, and their understanding and their perception is equally true to their own context. So what is essential is a kind of dialogue, and there also comes the role of non-violence. If I'm all set to negate the other kind of truths and asserting that what I have understood is the only truth, ultimate truth, and that is false, because it's always going to be a partial understanding of the reality, and at one attempt, or whatever objectivity I may have, whatever amount of efforts I may do to understand the reality in a very comprehensive way, the fact remains that I have a location to look at the world. For me, what is more significant is to have a dialogue with different versions of truth, different kinds of truth, because that is something which is going to take us to a more comprehensive and a wider understanding of the reality. That's basically how I look at. And the point which I made about post-truth, and the point that I said that we have landed up over here, it's a journey, because that's how we moved ahead. If I'm somebody who's working in, let's say, a Marxist kind of, having a Marxist kind of orientation, maybe a Marxist socialist movement, somebody, if I'm working with an anti-caste movement with a particular kind of ideological orientation, I always considered my truth as the ultimate truth. And it's not the case that that truth was not truth, but that it was relative truth. And unless and until I enter into a dialogue with somebody who's probably having a different kind of version of reality and different program to change the reality, I am not going to have a more comprehensive way to deal with falsehood. Somebody who's very deliberately projecting a very deceptive and mischievous view of reality. And that is the situation today. We have come over here and we are not able to handle this. But then what we were doing so far was we were holding our own relative truths as the absolute truth. So what is required is some kind of dialogue and some kind of openness to understand our own versions of truth as well, if we have to counter what is being told to us as another kind of absolute truth.
Okay, there's, I think, time for one last question, and it's probably what one might call a lot more political question, an old one, and this is a question by Tejinder Gautam. He says, do you find Gandhian non-violence is more or less similar to an act of violence against the downtrodden people, particularly in the case of the Pune Pact? So I think there's a larger discussion and context, but I think it's an important one too, because it's been there. And so if any one of you would like to respond to that one as well, then we'll have to close, unfortunately. Yes, Rajni, your mic is off, Rajni.
Yeah, I know. I put it on. Yeah. So I know this is a very important question about the last part of your question, Mr. Gautam, is very important, that as downtrodden are still struggling for their representation in the largest democracy of the world, it's a very large question. And I think here in this, since we are wrapping up in 2-3 minutes, we cannot go into historical discussion on different ways, applying in a sense what Chaitra just said to the issue of Pune Pact. I think what matters today is how can each one of us contribute to this cause of struggling to make this a true democracy. I think that is the crux of the matter. And there I want to connect that with the issue of the internet, which was being discussed. I think, and since we are having this discussion on an IIT platform, I think unless technologists ask themselves the question that just because something can be done, should it be done? Just because a technology is possible, should we be, deploying it because it is possible? These are very deep questions, and going forward, there is no way to have the struggle for justice in the social and economic sense without also addressing this question. Because today, the dilemma, why is that film called Social Dilemma? Because it shows how democracy is being, you see, theoretically, the internet should have been a very democratizing technology, because it allows everybody to participate without any barriers, without any issue of caste, class, etc., or even location. But in fact, the internet is now being used in a very large way to undermine not just democracy, but how we are able to see reality. And the data that is being presented about how young people's cognitive abilities are being handicapped, maybe for life. If, we don't know, it will take us 50 years to learn What is the impact of a of somebody who was given a cell phone at the age of 5 or 6 or 10? How did it change their ability even to cognize reality? So I think these are the fundamental questions we will have to address. And I think the only guide that we can get from Gandhiji will be one of fundamental principles. Can we do it with kindness to all? And as Chaitra kept saying so eloquently, can we do it by whatever the problem is? Can we address it by looking at all dimensions and not hanging on to just our own specific isolated view of that issue?
Great. Thank you. On that note, I think we will have to wrap up. Rajni, Chaitra, Shambhu, thank you so much. I think it's been...
Thank you very much for bringing us all together.
It was great. And I'm just going to request our head, Anand Rao. I'd like to assure him that we were not keeping him out deliberately because he's our head. I hope he's joined. If Anand is there, and he would like to say...
I've been here enjoying the deliberation. It was very well put together. Thanks a lot, Pankaj, for taking the lead and conducting the whole program in a very timely manner and getting all the personal insights from all the three eminent speakers that we had today. Sorry, we had very limited time, but I suppose this can be a beginning and we can have subsequent sequels to this dialogue and discussion in the months to come. Okay, so with that, let me thank all three speakers and Pankaj for this wonderful program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anand. And once again, thanks, Shambhu, Rajni, Chaitra, and all the people. We had almost 150 people joining us at one point of time. So very, very enriching. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.